your hands together for Crystal Fraser.
Fongwizi Masicho. So I hurt my back shoveling yesterday. So I'm just going to sit if the microphone will reach, which I don't actually think it will. So I'm going to stand until I can sit. Okay, I'm so happy to be here this morning. This is my third Gwich'in academic conference. The only year that I missed was in Newfoundland. So I had the pleasure of attending Ottawa and Inuvik last year, and so I'm really hoping that I can share some experiences with you. I would like to say that I'm very grateful to be a guest on Treaty 6, the homeland of the Métis Nation. And it's just an honor to be invited again. So I think I know most of you. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Crystal Fraser. I'm Gwich'in. I grew up in Inuvik and at my family's in fish camp on the Gwich'in, the Mackenzie River. My mother is Juliette Bullock and my father is Bruce Fraser. My grandmother is Marka Bullock, and my grandfather was Richard Bullock. So very happy to connect to family while you're all here. So let's just jump right in. Feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or comments throughout my talk today. Okay, so this is my introduction slide. This is my grandmother while she was residing on long-term care in Inuvik, and I had the honor of taking her first selfie. So that was a really fun day, and I always start out even more formal academic talks by speaking about my family. I find it's really important to ground ourselves, not only as Gwich'in, but as Indigenous peoples. So we're Dinjiju, Gwich'in, Lushu, First Nations, Indigenous people. So the Gwich'in word for Gwich'in is Dinjiju, Indigenous peoples. And the word Gwich'in actually is used improperly now. It's actually a marker to refer to a place or location. So you think about Gwich'ia Gwich'in, Tetlek Gwich'in, and so I live in Edmonton, and so I'm now Edmonton Gwich'in. So on the left here, you'll see a photo of me and my cousin Agnes Mitchell. We're deconstructing a moose head. So really important that even though we live in the city or you live away from your ancestral grounds, that you continue practicing your culture, that you stay grounded with your mentors and your educators. On the right here is a photo of my daughter Quinn. This was actually in Yellowknife last year, and she was just maybe 14 months old, and she had never seen a moose hide before, and that little girl just ran right up and grabbed a scraper and started working on that hide. It was a pretty amazing thing. And in the introduction to me and my life, Quinn was mentioned, and this is actually her first Gwich'in academic conference that she's missing. She's been at the previous two, but she is at the Briar in Regina cheering on Team Cooey. So I think she can be excused for this year. Okay, so even though I live outside the GSA, even though I'm not around my mentors all the time, as I would like to be, I'm still here, immersed in my culture, trying to live the best life that I can live. And a part of that has actually been through language revitalization. And so Last fall, I undertook a social media campaign inspired by JC Firth, who started the Speak Gwich'in to Me hashtag. And these are lessons that I do every day with my daughter, usually Monday through Friday. And it's words or phrases that we're learning that would be applicable to the life of a toddler, which has been amazing and also sometimes absolutely crazy. But we reached our 100th post a few weeks ago, so that was a big milestone. And so this is available on social media. We also have a YouTube channel if anyone would like to follow along. Okay, so I was just actually speaking with Crystal about how we approach our education, not only as Gwich'in, but also as young people, as youth, as individuals who, maybe already have families started, who want to have careers, who want to become involved. And so I was actually about 24 years old when I started my education here at the U of A. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I was living in Yellowknife, and I took a leap of faith and applied, and I got in. And I actually was registered in political science. And very quickly, I realized that political science was not for me. So then I was in the position that, do I leave school? Do I stay in school? I'm just not sure. And then I got a really great mentor in history, and having a mentor is probably one of the most important things that you can do as a young person who is wanting to start a career, who is wanting to grow yourself. So find yourself a good mentor or mentors. So I did a BA in history and religious studies, and actually my focus was on European history. I was set to start a master's on the history of witchcraft in England in the 16th century. And that was all really fun, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. And then, this mentor, who was actually an expert in witchcraft in the 16th century in England, he pulled me aside and said, you have a lot of promise, but maybe what you should be doing is researching your own people. Like, of course, this is a very fun topic, and we've had a great time, and I believe in you. I believe in your ability to go on to graduate school. But why don't we just take a step back and see what maybe we can do here? And so I actually did an extra year of undergraduate study here at the U of A. I took French courses, I was in Canadian history, and it was all very amazing to me. It was amazing in the sense that Indigenous peoples and histories were almost completely marginalized. I had one prof, the history of Alberta, 400 level course. So, you show up on the first day, you're looking through the syllabus, and of course there's nothing about Indigenous peoples in this course. In this 3-month university level course of Alberta history, there's nothing. And so after the class, I walk up and I say, where's our week on Aboriginal history? And he said, what are you talking about? There's no Aboriginal history in Alberta. So something that happened about 10 years ago, really motivated me with the desire to change, the way that we view Canadian history. And as I went through this process, through my master's and learning about colonialism, I realized that it's actually much more than that. We need people trained in academia to tell our own histories on our own terms, with our own voices. And so I started my PhD. I always knew that my work was going to be grounded in community. And so returning home to Inuvik lots, I had community meetings in Sikachik, Fort McPherson, Inuvik, Aklavik, asking lots of questions. What is important to you? What do you want? And I actually quickly found that what I wanted and what communities wanted were not the same thing. they did not like my first idea at all, which was a really great lesson. And so as a community, we decided that, you know, I'm in the position where I'm Gwich'in, where my mother went to Grolier Hall, where my grandmother went to Immaculate Conception Residential School in Aklavik, that I have community ties, and that maybe I can make a small contribution to the literature through this perspective. And so that's where I started. So I'm just going to share a little bit about my research now. I did start in 2010, and so I'm right at the very end of my program. My thesis has been written since last summer, and so now it's just making those refinements and working with my committee. So I actually start with the history of education and residential schools in Nanhak-Thuk. Has anyone ever heard that word before, Nanhak-Thuk? No? Okay. So one of the approaches that I wanted to take as an emerging historian, as an emerging academic, was to instill Dinjiju worldviews into my thesis. So I called up my cousin, Alistine Andre, and I said, who can I talk to that will give me some insight into how we viewed our land before the arrival of missionaries and Indian agents and colonizers? And she said, well, I think you need to call Bertha Francis and Fort McPherson. So that's exactly what I did. And I said, hi, Bertha, I'm wondering if you can help me, because I'm trying to conceptualize the GSA, the Gwich'in communities. I'm trying to conceptualize them in a way that would reflect pre-colonial ideas. And so she came up with Nanhak-Thuk, which actually means the whole country. It means our whole country. It means the regions where Dinjiju lived prior to organized communities, prior to the government-built town of Inuvik, prior to Indian agents. And so that's really cool, I think. And so by just having that word in the title of my thesis, I'm hoping to make non-Indigenous academics stand back and say, what does that mean? I've never heard of that before. Let's figure this out. So that's kind of the history of that word. But as we know, residential schools started in Aklavik in 1926 with the Roman Catholic Immaculate Conception Indian Residential School. Then All Saints Anglican School opened in 1936. And so this was really a time when colonial Indian policies in Canada were at its height. As many of you know from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's findings, over 100,000 Indigenous children were a part of these systems. And I did a lot of interviews. I did about 75 interviews in our communities, which if you're looking to do a thesis, 75 is too much. Don't do 75. But I have amazing transcripts and I have amazing stories from actually so many people who have passed on now. So I did interview some elders who attended the Aklavik Indian residential schools. And it's hard because on the one hand, they're living in these really horrific conditions in schools that are poorly heated, in schools that do not have enough food for everyone. These kids are managed by people who use excessive discipline, but on the other hand, some of them were able to remain in their home communities. Some of them were able to see their parents on the weekend. Some of them were able to go out and pick, cranberries. Some of them actually even managed their own trap lines at the schools in Aklavik. So we have this kind of unique balance that we didn't really have at the schools in southern Canada. so as we move into the 1940s, my analysis looks at the increasing number of day schools in the Northwest Territories. So on the one hand, you had residential schools, which removed kids from their families, but then on the other hand, you had day schools. And so this is actually in Fort McPherson, 1953. So you think of a day school, and that would be a positive and a good thing because kids can stay in their communities. But we were still hiring non-Indigenous teachers from down south. So this is 1953. The instructor, which you see on the left, is Marjorie Hines. And she remarked, I have this quote here from our National Archives, written by Marjorie Hines. She said, quote, "The Eskimo hasn't the same integrity as a good kind of white person. Therefore, our education scheme should include opportunities for developing character and a sense of responsibility," end quote. And so even the day schools were a good thing, but on the other hand, schooling and education was still kind of fueled by racist sentiment that framed Indigenous people, Gwich'in, Inuvialuit, Métis, as subpar. 1958, 1959, the Government of Canada, working closely with the NWT Council, thought it would be a great idea to move Aklavik to a brand new site called East 3. East 3 was an engineering site. There were actually 8 engineering sites. So you have East 1, East 2, East 3, all the way to East 8. And they selected East 3, present day Inuvik, to build a new town that could accomplish state goals. So here, I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar. In the middle, we have Sir Alexander Mackenzie School. On your left, I believe, maybe someone can correct me, I believe on your left is Stringer Hall. That would be the Anglican residential school. Diane?
Grolier Hall on the left.
Grolier on the left. Okay, so Grolier Hall on the left, run by the Oblates, classified as an Indian residential school, and then on the right, Anglican Stringer Hall. So Grolier Hall run by Max Rayon, and Stringer Hall run by the Holmans for almost the whole time it was open. So we have this new town, and everything about Inuvik is modern. They have, a new airport with a new runway that can land all kinds of really cool aircraft that Aklavik couldn't. We have the construction of all kinds of infrastructure. We have these new schools. And this was really a unique time in the late 1950s when literally almost every single residential school in Canada was being threatened with closure because they knew that Indian policies, residential schooling policies, did not work. Yet, we have in the far north, these institutions were just opening. And I mean, the stories that come out of Inuvik, Grolier Hall, Stringer Hall, in Fort McPherson you had Fleming Hall. The stories that come out of Nunhak Thuk are quite similar to stories that happened in the South. And so you have violence, you have trauma, you have, very poor relationships between students and their supervisors. Not only that, you have crappy relationships between students themselves. You have children who were separated not only from their brothers or sisters, but also by age. And so in Inuvik, Grolier was Roman Catholics, Stringer was Anglicans, but then within those institutions, you had the female side and the male side, but then you were further broken up by age. And so on the top floor would be the junior girls, on the bottom floor would be the senior girls. And so it kind of still every which way to divide families was still being practiced. So here I have a photograph of Grolier Hall students marching, and you can see that all of their individuality, all of their personality has been removed through the wearing of uniforms. They're marching in a single file line, so no opportunity to kind of laugh with each other or speak with each other. And you can see the igloo church in the background. So that was the 1960s. As I had mentioned, ongoing trauma, and so even when we look at practices with our bodies, and academics will call this the colonization of the body. And so on the one hand, you can colonize, everyday life, but you can still colonize bodies. And so the kinds of foods that we eat. One thing I've learned about learning Gwich'in is that, physically I'm not really able to say a barred L. I don't know how to train my mouth and my throat in order to make that sound. So the learning of English would be a colonization of the body. And so that is a part of my analysis. And this is, again, at Grolier Hall, a little boy who is sitting kind of alone. But you'll also notice the other little boys around him who have the exact same haircuts. And so again, a sense of uniformity, a sense that you cannot be who you are at these institutions. And there's actually all kinds of stories about this that came out through my research, in the sense that, people recalled waving to their brother or sister across the cafeteria, that on movie night, there would be an extension cord running down the middle of the room in order to separate the boys and the girls. So, while these policies were in place at a fairly late stage within Canadian history, these memories are still very accessible. They're still a part of our lives, our living history. And there was other ways that trauma could be ongoing. This, I believe, was actually at Stringer Hall, and a part of the argument I make in my thesis is that cleanliness and morality were linked to whiteness. So the exercise of Indigenous kids washing their hands before they were allowed to sing the Canadian anthem, because naturally we're dirty. Naturally, in order to be a good Canadian, in order to sing the anthem, we need to be cleansed. Here in the photo, you see a white lady who, I believe this is Mozzie Morby. She's dressed in white. She's standing in a very authoritative way, looking down at a child washing his shoes. So stuff like this that really happened on an everyday basis, that while you're in the moment of these relationships, maybe you can't see the ongoing power networks that are kind of fueling this kind of thing. So this is another thing that I look at in my research. But, and there is always a but, and that is the ongoing strength and resilience of our ancestors. And so does anyone know who the little girl is in the photo on the left? 1953 Aklavik. Mabel Brown. She's a daughter of Mary Kennedy, and she now lives in Inuvik, and she is very successful. And how about the photo on the right? Someone must know. Fred Carmichael. Yeah, so previous administration with the Gwich'in Tribal Council, he was the first Gwich'in to obtain his commercial pilot's license in the Northwest Territories. And so, even though these schools were awful, even though the 1950s, 60s, 70s, Grolier didn't close till 1996. The colonial policies were still in place to eliminate our Indigenous cultures, yet we still have very successful people who currently live in our communities. Remember when I said that everyone should get a mentor? Yeah. So here. Here's some ideas. How about these guys? Sharon and Shirley Firth, 4-time Olympians who are out of a clavic. Okay, so many success stories. I could really go on and on and on here. If anyone has not read Porcupines and China Dolls, an amazing piece of fiction by former GTC President Robert Alexie Jr. On the right here, we have Tanya Larson, who lives in Yellowknife now, the daughter of Shirley Firth, pardon me, who has her own jewelry website right now. She's an artist. So many other people, JC, Chris, Jordan, who's at the back of the room. Again, these are all great people who somehow have figured out to work this really complex place that we call colonial Canada, but have made it. Okay, so a part of this conference is asking youth, asking everyone in this room to really think hard about who you are, about the kind of person that you want to be, about what you want to do and where you want to land. And I know this is the first day. No one has answers yet.